get by. It resides between my eyes. Walk through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jake Finkelstein of 10cube.co. Jake, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since we are in EO, I had Vern Harnish on the podcast. He's the founder of EO. He wrote Scaling Up. That was a great interview. Also, another favorite guest and book was Gino Wickman, who wrote Traction, who started EOS. And another fan favorite, one of my personal favorites, is Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference. He's an ex-FBI hostage negotiator. So I actually got the book, Jake, not for business, but because of kids. And I was like, I need to be able to better negotiate with my kids and get them out the door when they're not listening to me. So that's why I got the book. But that many more, InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. And at Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. And Jake is an agency owner, has been started multiple agencies, and just like agencies work with the magic elves that work in the background to make sure the host and it makes it look easy for the host and the company. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships, and I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. I actually have many episodes I've done on Inspired Insider that walk through a lot of things, like the 5 different types of episodes every podcast should create. How do you name your podcast, and every other question that we've gotten. So you can check those out. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Jake Finkelstein. He's the founder and CEO of 10cube. You can find them at 10cube.co. And 10cube creates advanced technology for modern marketers, and he'll go into what they're doing and how kind of his agency journey has evolved to what he's creating now. He's a really accomplished serial entrepreneur and revenue marketing expert. He cut his teeth in the entertainment business before founding 2 successful marketing agencies. And his past client experiences include, but is not limited to, Lenovo, Citrix, Dollar Tree, Toyota, Duke University, and many, many more. Jake, thanks for joining me.
Jeremy, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor and pleasure.
I'm really, really interested to hearing your evolution as an agency owner and what lessons you brought from each of the past one to this one. But let's just start with, tell people a little about 10cubed and what you do.
Great. So 10cube is a marketing technology firm. As you mentioned, we create advanced technology for modern marketers. The first product that we've brought to market is a all-in-one digital marketing platform that helps our clients accelerate revenue growth, decrease costs, and increase speed to market. So we've done a lot of work around creating a library of tools, resources, and prepackaged services that allow us to live up to that promise. And we work with clients across industries, have good stories to tell in B2B software as a service and manufacturing, as well as a couple of others.
I know when we talked previously, you have, I think of it, I guess, in sports. And when you look at sports, they have a playbook. And You were saying you have over 100 plays that you run. Talk about what that means, that you have these plays for businesses to run.
Yeah, so no, it's a great question, and they really fall into 3 buckets. So on one side, we've invented a number of tools that allow us to more efficiently and effectively, again, scale revenue. And these have a very wide range of applicability. So it's things like content creation, campaign planning, even simple tactical things like search engine optimization and A/B split testing on advertising. So right now, these are all kind of behind the curtain. As we've gone to market, we've actually gotten a lot of feedback that our clients don't want another screen to log into. So we do operate as a managed services business. But the kind of tools and technology we've built, I personally find really fun and exciting. Second bucket is we have pre-packaged campaigns. So this is where the verticalization strategy that we have is really important. Every time that we run a play, so whether it's an email program or a digital advertising program, we learn and we get better because we're constantly testing our hypotheses and leveraging that data in a recursive learning standpoint. The third way is actually the data that we're creating. So, this is primary data that's built off all the different campaigns that we're running across all of the industries and just makes what we're doing that much more effective and efficient.
Talk about feedback. I mean, we'll talk about, the feedback that you've gotten that got you to this particular agency and what you learned from the last, but what are some of as 10 Cubed evolves, what are some of the feedback you've gotten that helped you shape what you're doing now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I'm a huge believer in the customer development process. So Steve Blank, if you're familiar with 4 Steps to the Epiphany. I think that you just got to go out and ask all the dumb questions and get all the right answers. And that's really how I've started every business, including 10 Cube. So, had this idea around building technology that was going to be more meaningful for marketers, went out and just said, tell me all the reasons why this isn't going to work. And what I kept hearing again and again and again is that the prospects were frustrated with the tool set, that they oftentimes felt underwater, that they were under-resourced, and they really needed ways to more efficiently and effectively kind of do what they're challenged to do, particularly when you're dealing on the smaller side of the market. So think like $1 million to $10 million a year in revenue. They have big goals, they're ambitious, but the tool set doesn't always scale to where they're going. But if you look at kind of the fastest growing businesses in the world, they have these tools, they have these data sets, and we're really trying to bring that down market. So the problem set really is around accessibility a lot of the times. And the feedback that we've gotten from the tools that we're creating is that we actually move really fast. And our clients really like that, even if they don't always understand how some of the magic is actually happening.
I was watching a video of you from over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This is pre-beard. And you were actually talking about some of these exact same things, which is how important it is to talk to your customer and go and ask them their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Even going back then.
Yeah, I mean, I think that particularly when you're looking at, creating personas or ideal customer profiles, the textbook is going to say, go out and do surveying, go out and do, third-party, research and look at the, journals. I think all of that's fine and good, but, maybe it's the sales guy in me. Nothing beats sitting across from somebody and asking them the question and watching their body language, watch where they pause, watch where they hesitate. I think all of that is enormously useful and tells you a lot about where their real pain points are, and especially when you're dealing with folks that may not be as sophisticated as you are in the subject matter, because they don't know what they don't know. And you can just learn so much by exploring questions in a real hands-on way, even if it's not quite as scalable as something like a survey.
Talk about what you learned from your previous agency, Method Savvy. I know you had a couple. Yep. What did you learn from Method Savvy that you now bring into 10 Cubed?
Oh, geez, how much time do you have? There's tons of lessons there. So for context, I started Method Savvy 14 years ago and change. So, it's a long, long journey there. Very proud of, what we were able to accomplish, and in particular, the team's efforts in doing so. I think there's a couple of key takeaways that I have. One is that it's very different running a business that has scale versus a business that is getting to scale. They're very often not the same skill sets. And that it's really important to be self-aware enough to understand what you're good at versus what you need people around you from a business operations standpoint to be really good at. So the way I'm taking that forward into 10 Cubed is that I'm making sure that I bring on an operator for the business much, much sooner than I did at Method Savvy. I think the second thing is that early on we were positioned as a data-driven marketing company, which at the time was still innovative and kind of interesting. Now it's just kind of par for the course. But after the first 3 or 4 years of the business, it started to not be as well differentiated, and we didn't move quickly enough to clarify our position. So ultimately, we ended up as a marketing partner for ambitious leaders. And we found that that worked very well, particularly in the way that we articulated it. And I'll kind of spare the spiel here. But it really resonated well because it blended all of our strategic and data-driven capabilities in a really focused way. I think the lesson that I'm taking forward there with 10 Cubed is to constantly pressure test the position in market, because that evolves over time. It evolves over time for every business, and there's no problem with that. But you need to be really attuned to how the market's shifting so you can stay ahead of the curve instead of behind it.
You
I think
mentioned,
I'm sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead, keep going.
I was just going to say the last thing that I'll say is the importance of reinforcing culture consistently, and all of the leadership books will tell you that. So like I'm not breaking any new ground there, but really making sure that culture is the lens that we're hiring through and firing through, and doing that in a again a scalable way. So it really permeates the culture is another important value that I'm going to bring forward here as we move ahead.
Jake, what I was going to ask was, you mentioned you would bring in an operator sooner, and you do focus on things you're good at. What do you feel you're good at? And then I'm interested in what do you look for in an operator?
Yeah. So what I'm most passionate about is product development and the big relationships. So, I have that typical visionary problem is that I have way more ideas than I can actually execute. So I like to play in the dirt a lot, experiment, have these, customer development conversations, see what's going to stick, and then inspire people to go build it. That's a lot of fun for me and really where I want to spend the bulk of my time. Also enjoy, the big relationships. I'm a natural salesperson, so, it kind of comes with the territory. I get a lot of energy from that. So desire to spend my time primarily in those two areas. Now, to your question about what I look for in an operator, not to be pedantic, but certainly experience in the role. And when I say an operator, I'm really referring to, you mentioned EOS earlier, the kind of prototypical integrator. So somebody that's done it before, that has the experience, that understands how to, particularly for this business, operate in a technology company, because it's very different than a services business in my experience. And somebody that has loads of patience, and I would argue probably, if not most importantly, pretty close to the top, is understanding how to say no to me in a way that I'll actually listen to. Because I think like a lot of founders, I can be pretty passionate sometimes, and there's an art to saying no to somebody like me.
Yeah, I did have. There's a interview I did with Mark Winters, who co-authored Rocket Fuel with Gino Wickman. I think they have a quiz somewhere that you can see where are you on that spectrum of visionary or integrator. So probably, I think they were saying it's definitely more common for the founders to be more visionary than integrators.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's sub 5% of leaders are integrators. So you're not an easy role to fill, but a very, very important one.
So Jake, what do you think you will do differently in 10 Cube that you did in Method Savvy and in the previous agency?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the key lessons are not unique to us or myself. There are definitely cases where I want to hire faster and fire faster, and making sure that core values are the lens for that decision. As I already mentioned, being sure to be clear-eyed about bringing in the right type of operator at different stages of our growth, because getting from here to there is not always what is going to be the easiest thing. I also believe that, particularly for this business, because we're technology first, we need to be much more intentional about our roadmap, because it just takes such an investment to build the tools and technologies that we are and that I envision that we will. It's going to be very easy to make expensive mistakes unless we're intentional, but without being too rigid. I think that when you're primarily a services business, you can ebb and flow a little bit more easily than we're going to be able to here at 10 Cubed.
You mentioned pressure testing,
Hmm.
positions and market. And I know one of the, with 10 cubed, I know you help a lot of different types of companies, specifically B2B software, B2B SaaS companies and
Hmm.
manufacturing.
Hmm.
Talk about what you are doing and what you will do to continue to pressure test, let's say, B2B SaaS, for instance.
Yeah, so I'm actually going around and having additional conversations right now with marketing leaders from across a very wide range of B2B SaaS companies. Not because I'm trying to sell them anything, per se, but because I really want to listen to what their current pain points are and what they're concerned about as they move ahead. The other kinds of conversations I'm having are actually with VC and private equity firms. I'm hearing some really interesting trends around where their portfolio companies are running into trouble. Particularly in the private equity side, I'm hearing a lot of issues around building scalable flywheels and doing it in a structured way instead of trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. There's a lot of folks that, well, I'm painting with a broad brush, but there are too many marketing folks that will come in and try to do something really innovative when something a little bit more blocking and tackling is required first. And that's not bad. Like, you got to put those pieces in place so you can be highly creative and highly innovative, but you got to make sure that they're in place first. So right now I'm exploring those kinds of issues on the B2B SaaS side. Also we're seeing some interesting trends in the hypotheses we're creating and the ones that we're testing in terms of our campaigns. There is some movement in the market right now around hesitance on spending. So it requires better storytelling, more personalization, better data to make decisions. So we're making sure we're investing dollars in the right place to get the return that we're looking for.
How does your team differ, Jake? You were saying, there's a lot of behind the scenes, and the clients don't necessarily care how it works. I mean, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, it's kind of like magic happening behind the scenes. I imagine there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more technology in this particular company
Yes.
than there was in previous. What kind of
Yeah.
team do you need for that you didn't need in the
Yeah.
past?
So the engineering team is bigger and it's going to be funded much more aggressively. That's partially because we need to build things that are going to be scalable. It's also because I want to experiment a lot more with technology than I had previously. The way that we've structured our account management and client services team is different. We want to be much more white glove in the conversation, but much more hands off in the execution. So, our strategies are not necessarily bespoke. Like they're built on these plays that have structure to them. They have standard operating procedures because we know that they work. That doesn't mean that we can't be innovative on top of them. We want to always test the 20% at the top, but we need to make sure that from a client strategy standpoint that we're not trying to be bespoke in terms of how we're approaching these things. And it's just kind of a little bit of a different structure than we've had before. There's also many things that we don't do here, which is different, particularly at Method Savvy. We were positioned as a integrated marketing agency and consultancy, which means we had lots of different skills. At 10 Cube, we're much narrower. We're focused on 8 practice areas because we believe that these practice areas are going to allow us to drive revenue, lower cost, and increase the speed of go to market.
Talk about the 8 practice areas for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's brand strategy, campaign strategy, content marketing, digital advertising, email marketing, lead generation, search engine optimization, and social media marketing. I think that's 8 if I remember correctly. And the reason why we focus specifically in those is we're doing a lot of hub and spoke work. So we're making sure that there's clarity of position in market, where the real value prop is, who we're talking to, and what the pain points are, and all the broad why questions that you like to address in those, that we have a central message map, a central set of messaging and content that's going to support that. And then we're putting it out in integrated digital channels. Why? Because that's where the audience lives. So a lot of the tools and campaigns that we've structured is really about making sure, we're telling these compelling stories in the right places, but we're doing it in an optimally efficient and, test driven manner.
How do you decide, Jake? Sometimes it's just as important to decide what not to do, right?
Yeah.
How did you decide what things you were not going to do as a company?
Anything that has enough complexity that we cannot build a standard operating procedure around it. So a good example of that is website design. So we have capabilities around landing page creation, but I've done enough web design in my career to know that like unless you're truly dealing with pure templates, which you can do, but most the kinds of clients we work with would not be real satisfied with. You get into some pretty decent customization because that's where the value is. I'm not interested in going through that level of customization. There's also a lot of work on the brand side. Even though we do brand strategy, we do not do branding, and that's a very important difference. The reason why we have brand strategy at all is that sometimes when you're dealing with lead generation or demand generation, the actual problem isn't what you're doing; it's the story that you're telling, or you don't actually know why you're different. And why you're valuable. So like we have to make sure that everything we're doing is anchored there. So again, we're trying to be very intentional about making sure that we're doing the things that can build the flywheel instead of doing like the highly bespoke work, because that's where all the complexity comes in.
Yeah, branding's tough. I mean,
Very.
people who do it, it's difficult. It's very subjective also.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing it the right way, it is defensible because you're doing a lot of work that is kind of research based. So again, Methods Heavy did a lot of branding and brand identity work. So I have some very good methodologies and approaches to that, but it takes a lot of human interaction and elbow grease. And when you're dealing with that type of complexity, you're dealing with a very different cost structure and a very different value proposition than what we have. However, if I have a client come to me with that, I have some very good partners that I can direct them to. So, we're certainly not leaving them in the lurch, but there are specialists in, that area as well as some others that, are going to be better suited for those types of problems than us.
Yeah, let's get a little deeper on, what you do. And we mentioned the B2B software. I know you have helped B2B SaaS companies in the tax space. What did they come to you with? What were some of the challenges, issues, and what did you do with them?
Yeah, so every company that comes to us wants more sales and revenue. So that's kind of the proverbial question is how to grow. And we're no different in tackling those problems than other folks in our space. When it comes to that particular example, historically the brand had a lot of success with digital advertising and in particular paid search and paid social, but it has become a very expensive space. I don't know how familiar you are with digital advertising in general, but it's essentially an arbitrage game. And when you have more dollars pour into these bigger channels, they just get more and more expensive because that's what's best for the platform and not what's best for the advertiser. So there's an increasing amount of pressure to look at alternative avenues, both in terms of test and learn on the arbitrage side. So like other digital advertising channels that may not have been explored as well, or certainly aren't as competitive, but have good audience profiles. And how can you lean more on owned and earned channels? Like how can you really create differentiated positions with content, and how can you be smarter about leveraging social media and search engine optimization and inbound marketing in ways that are going to lower the cost per lead or cost per transaction. So, without getting into nitty gritty detail, some of the tools and resources that we're using in order to do that's really been kind of the focus of that particular program, but also, a number of programs like it.
And then how does it work behind the scenes? You were mentioning kind of the concierge. Is it your team is actually helping them use the platform or your team is using the platform or a combination?
Yeah, so our team right now is using the platform, and that's very intentional. The initial plan with this particular product was to make it a user-focused software as a service platform. And what we heard back is that the users, which are typically the marketing managers and the organizations, were already busy enough and didn't want to learn another tool to use at this point. So the way that we treat our account managers is really as client strategists. So they sit with them, they understand the pain points, the needs, they have training and skill set around, marketing and digital marketing in general, and, how you can approach some of these problems. Then we'll come back and with our, internal managers, we'll say, okay, what are the right tools? What are the right plays in the playbook that we're going to use for this? We get approval on it, and then we'll go and we'll run them. So from a client experience standpoint, it's pretty easy. We have one 30 to 45-minute meeting, with the client per week. They get consistent reporting, and things go well as long as we're doing our job correctly. In the longer run, in the longer term product roadmap, we do have products that are going to be user facing in the end, and we're already starting to develop those. But in terms of this first product, that's how it's structured.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on team and onboarding team members, right? I mean, they're so important. They're talking back and forth to your clients on regular calls to your clients. They're maybe doing strategy. They may actually be doing strategy and doing some of the, behind the scenes work. What do you do when you're onboarding new team members? What's that process look like?
A great question. And I'll be the first to admit that I haven't always been great at this over the years. So there's a lot of hard-learned lessons and of what to do right and what to stay away from there. At 10 Cubed, we do a couple of things. So first is we make sure that for the first 2 weeks, there's no client interaction at all. So if they happen to be client facing, we want to make sure that they're focused on internal processes and procedures, that they're learning all the plays in the playbook. If they're less technical, how the more technical items go. If they're more technical, how to deal with people, all this kind of fun things. Then we'll kind of slowly bring them into client conversations. So we'll have them, be involved in some of the weekly meetings just to hear the context of the conversations and the kind of pain points or questions that'll typically come up. So even if they have a non-client facing role, I think that's important to have that type of exposure. And part of our kind of ongoing process is to make sure that they can continue from time to time to have that kind of exposure just to stay close to the clients. The other thing that we do is focus a lot on our core values. So we spend a lot of time talking about, why we're here, what we're doing, why we're actually doing it. And, the entire onboarding process takes about a month. And then at that point, they can kind of be off to the races and actually doing the work.
You mentioned there have been learnings, mistakes, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
What's an example of one of those that you definitely afterwards put a better process in place because of it?
Yeah. So a number of years ago, and this is nobody's in particular fault. It was a blind spot, as typically happens in many growing organizations. You hire when you have pain, right? Like you have needs, particularly in a services business. Like you don't want to overstaff because that gets you into cash flow trouble and you might have to do layoffs, and that's terrible. So you wait basically as long as you think you can. And, by the time you open a position, it takes 2 to 3 months to hire somebody and get somebody onboarded at all. So, in this particular instance that I'm thinking about, we hired somebody and started bringing them into client meetings their second day. And they had no idea what was going on. Like they felt a lot of pressure to participate. And ultimately, the individual I'm thinking of resigned on day 4. We very quickly learned from that. And we're like, we cannot throw people into these roles. Even if the intent is just to have them listen, it's uncomfortable. Now, one of the other interesting things that we learned coming out of that is that we swung the pendulum too far the other way. We said, okay, you're not going to talk to anybody for your first month. And we had team members going, no, I want to get involved. Like I want to start doing work. I want to talk to clients. So we had to find that kind of nice, happy medium where, we were creating space for people to feel comfortable in their roles, but also, making sure that they had meaty, good work that they could dive into.
Yeah. And people probably vary. Some, you could have thrown one person in after 4 days and then maybe they'd be fine and some people not. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I've heard varying opinions in the agency world on this topic of, hiring local versus virtual. And I know that you from the previous company had a lot of local staff in North Carolina. So what are your thoughts on hiring local versus virtual?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it's very contextual to the kind of work and the kind of culture that you want to run. So I am personally a believer that there is a huge amount of value in having people in the same room, particularly when you're doing any type of creative work. And when I use the term creative, I don't mean design, I mean like creative problem solving. Um, there are plenty of ways to approximate brainstorming or workshop sessions virtually, and none of them are great. They're perfectly fine, but they're not great because you don't get the same energy. Um, at Universal Bus Intelligence, which was my first agency, and then Method Savvy, which was my second one, any time that we had something media and creative oriented, I got everybody into the same room, even if they were remotely located. I wanted to fly them in because I just thought it was that important. At 10 Cubed, it's a little bit different because we're much more technology and engineering led. I think that it's not that we're not doing creative work, but I think the type of creative work is different enough that we can support much more fully remote staff in a way that's going to be productive. I'm personally not a big work from home person, so I like to have some local folks that I can see and interact with. But I think on the net, there's certain kinds of work that you just really have the best outcomes if you can do it in person.
How did you get into being an agency owner in the first place?
Oh yeah, that's a long and windy road. So, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company as a teenager and had a couple others before, any ones that actually made me real money.
What was the company as a teenager? What'd you do?
It was called 42 Records. So it was a record label. I think I was 16 when I incorporated it back in the 90s when people went to record stores and still bought records.
What was
But
the
actually,
genre?
I'm sorry,
What was the genre that you were into?
punk rock, hardcore, alternative.
Yeah. So who's your favorite bands?
In general or from the
Yeah,
label?
in
In
general.
general. Oh, geez. Replacements, Nirvana, NoFX. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. I could go on for quite a while. But yeah, so I actually cut my teeth, as you mentioned, in the music business. So, I've had an artist management company and a record label, and then decided that I was really passionate about music and wanted to work in it professionally. Took a role with Megaforce Records, which discovered Metallica, Anthrax, King's X, and they had a jam band label as well that had Disco Biscuits and similar bands. And then I left there in 97, 98, and took a job with Sony Music Entertainment. So one of the big major labels, and worked with Columbia and Epic and Aware and kind of all these great labels. And then I got kind of sick of the corporate landscape. It wasn't really where I was aligned. And decided that I knew better than everybody else. And my co-founder agreed, and we decided to start a music marketing company called Universal Buzz Intelligence, and it very quickly grew into television, film, and video games. And then ultimately, after the first couple of years, we had larger brands coming to us because of the entertainment relationships that we had. So think folks like Pepsi and Diageo and Nike and like kind of those kinds of guys. And that's how I ended up in the agency business. Like I really wanted to work with artists, and then suddenly the people paying the bills were the big brands. And then I was like, I like this. This is fun. And then kind of continue with that trend over the next 20 years or so.
What was the transition from that agency to the next one?
Yeah, so Universal Buzz got bought by a company actually out of Chapel Hill. I think it was in 2003 or 2004. It was a company called Zoom Culture. It's kind of YouTube before YouTube. And then after about 18 months or so, we were the only part of the business making any money. So we ended up buying the business back. And I was bouncing around a lot. So I had a place in New York City, I had a place down here because my then wife was going to school down here and getting her master's. But I was also traveling like all over the country. So I was living out of a suitcase like 2-3 weeks a month. And I decided after a number of years that I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I found a way to kind of exit Universal Buzz Intelligence. And then I actually got probably the sickest I've ever been in my entire life. Like I just got the worst flu. It was like my body just decided like, okay, after the sprint, you're done. And I spent 2 weeks rolling around with nothing but this idea for Method Savvy in my head. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, I guess I have this idea. It's time to move on and go do it. And went through and did the customer development thing that, I've done for every business.
What was the initial idea behind Method Savvy?
Yeah. So the pain point that I had heard at Universal Buzz, particularly towards the end, is that, and remember, this is kind of the 2007, 2008 market crash, is that everybody's budgets was being cut, everybody's team was being cut in half, and they needed more accountability and transparency into their marketing and advertising investments. And to be blunt, as much fun as it is to get paid a couple $1 million by Virgin to produce a concept tour, when I really pressure test myself, what I was giving back to them was pretty pictures and good press. I didn't really understand how those investments were helping them achieve their vision, helping them move their business forward. And that was the core idea. I had no idea how to do it. I had lots of thinking about ways to explore it, but I wanted to create a business that allowed marketing to have a seat at the C-level table, because you could talk about the P&L, you could talk about the balance sheet, you could really prove the meaning of the investments and work.
What did you learn, Jake, about the acquisition process?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In terms of just like going through the acquisition process?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Learned a lot about valuations and how they work, particularly the first time. That was an interesting experience. Learned a lot about equity structure. Learned the art of the dance around these conversations, that they're, particularly when you're dealing with unsolicited, strategic acquirers. There can sometimes be conversation where they present it as a little bit more serious than it actually is. And, when you're naive in the process, you can get excited before you actually need to be excited. Learned a lot about how to have conversations with existing investors as well. And making sure that their needs and interests and wants are protected, because they are, at least partial owners in the business, and you got to take care of all the stakeholders, regardless of what, one or, maybe a couple of stakeholders actually want. So, it's a complicated but enjoyable process. I think, for me at least, it was a little hard to learn on the fly because I didn't have a lot of training in it, but, ended up on the other side pretty well.
We talked about B2B SaaS a little bit. I want to talk about manufacturing for a second.
Yeah.
And you worked with a package manufacturer, and I'd love to hear what were they coming to you for, and what did you do with them?
Yeah, so that was an interesting assignment, and kind of taking a step back for a second. What I really love about manufacturing in general is that it tends to be a laggard industry. So you can go in and do a lot of really great, meaningful work very quickly. Not because they're dumb, not because they haven't paid attention to this stuff, but it's because where the industry is, you can differentiate very quickly just by putting into place some of these advanced tools and campaign structures. So that's exactly what we did with the packaging clients. The initial pain point was around their e-commerce structure. So they had moved into B2B e-commerce, which is a fast-growing segment of the industry, and they had never done it before. The company had been around for decades, and they had their standard operating procedures that involved a lot of people that, there was opportunity for efficiency around. And we were able to work with them to understand the efficiency of their process, how to better, position themselves on the website, how to really do cross-sell, upsell programs in a meaningful way. Yeah, because a lot of, they had a smaller group of customers that were driving a significant amount of their revenue, but they were still kind of underselling to them. And then ultimately, we put into place an account-based marketing program that supported that as well. So, it's kind of a fun adventure for us to go through and understand, how their, systems were structured and the ways in which, we could apply, some of these more advanced techniques to help them achieve their goals in a meaningful way.
I love what you said there, Jake, about laggard industries. Like you said, there's sometimes it's just maybe more regulated. I mean, there's a variety of reasons why that could be. And I find there's a lot of opportunities in that. I mean, I've recently went through some real estate stuff, and it's like they're not even using DocuSign. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
And there's probably reasons why, because of the regulations, but there's also a lot of opportunity there. What are some of the other industries you think of as like they're kind of lagging behind a little bit? You mentioned manufacturing. What are some other ones that
Yeah, I mean,
come to
there's a
mind?
number of them. I mean, on the more regulated side, pharmaceutical is, a typical example. I'm really interested in the agricultural space. I personally have some experience there. 10Cube has not done a lot of work in that space as of yet, but it's another industry that, much like manufacturing, it has done really well from a sales team standpoint, but hasn't built broad technological digital marketing infrastructure. So it's an opportunity for those brands that are making those investments to really change the game within the industry. So I think that's an interesting one. I think equipment is another very interesting industry, kind of quasi manufacturing, but I'm thinking more like fleet management type of industries. Because again, like any industry that tends to be more sales led than marketing led tends to be laggards in my experience. So when you can go in and say, marketing is sales at scale. So if you can put these kind of structural pieces in place, it makes your sales, 10x performance, and you can just put the blocking and tackling in place in order to do that, then you create huge wins for your clients and across the industry.
Jake, I have one last question.
Sure.
Before I ask it, I just want to point people, they can check out 10cubed.co to learn more about what their company is doing. And you can poke around and see everything from the resources to the platform. My last question, Jake, is about, software and resources.
Mhm.
What are some of the, as an agency owner, technology owner, what are some of the softwares you like to use and
Mhm.
or resources?
Yeah, I'm a huge productivity tool nerd. And so like anything I can do to automate anything or get real organized, I just love. So my typical tech stack is HubSpot. I'm a big fan of that platform, particularly the sales and marketing cloud side. I love Things. I'm a Mac guy, so it's a good and kind of getting things done oriented tool. I'm a big Notion guy as well for note taking. Notion can be pretty complex if you want it to be, because it's very customizable, which I enjoy. You can also use it in a pretty, turnkey, easy way if you prefer to. And then there's a bunch of tools that actually, we or I have built kind of behind the scenes that allow us to do content marketing and or content creation, content calendaring. I'm a big SEO nerd as well, so some good keyword research and kind of topical research, but none of those are public outside the organization yet.
What about from a productivity tool standpoint? What do you use? Are
Mm.
there apps or on your phone or your computer or
Yeah,
software?
so things in Notion are the two that I use the most. I also will use a Pomodoro timer. Um, we do time tracking, not because we're, billing back to clients, but I just like to know where we're spending time, myself included. So I use Harvest for that, because I think it's a pretty easy way to track time without getting into the nitty gritty. But those tend to be the big ones. Oh, I guess the other one is I'm a Google Workspace person, so all of the Google apps there make my day quite a bit easier.
Jake, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey. It's always a crazy winding road for people. I appreciate it. So people can check out more at 10cubed.co and more episodes of the podcast.
Great,
Thanks,
Jeremy.
everyone.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Jake.
Appreciate it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.